Hi, everybody. It's Adam with HeartValveSurgery.com, and this is a special mitral valve repair patient success story. I am thrilled to be joined by Dr. Marc Gerdisch, who is the Chief of Cardiac Surgery at Franciscan Health in Indianapolis, Indiana. We are also joined by Janet Peterson, his patient, who is a retired accountant from Wadesville, Indiana. Dr. Gerdisch, it is great to see you again, and thanks for being with us today.
My pleasure, Adam. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Yeah, and Janet, I am really excited to hear about your journey through heart valve surgery, and thank you for being with us today.
You're welcome. I am happy to be here.
Yeah, so Janet, to get started, let's hear a little bit about your story. What were you diagnosed with? When were you diagnosed? And what happened next?
I was diagnosed with mitral valve prolapse, and that happened in probably the early 2000s. As we talked a little bit earlier, I lived in Southern California and was working there, and I happened to faint one day at work, and they hauled me off to the ER, and they were actually looking for a rhythm problem or something to explain why I fainted. So they did every kind of test they could come up with, and mitral valve prolapse was what they eventually diagnosed me with. So for the last 20 years, we've just been sort of monitoring that, and it all came to a head this year.
And Janet, when you say it came to a head, what specifically do you mean?
Well, we were doing, my cardiologist and I were doing annual echocardiograms just to monitor how the mitral valve prolapse was doing, and there were no issues. And I know a lot of people, and I've read all the information on your website and online about how a lot of people will make it and never have to have heart valve surgery with mitral valve prolapse. But the leaflets of my mitral valve got to the point where the echocardiogram in 2022 showed that there was serious regurgitation. So my cardiologist mentioned the word surgery for the first time, and that's when I delved into online research and trying to figure out, who would be best to fix it for me.
So Janet, you're diagnosed, you go through a very long period of watchful waiting, then you hear it's time for surgery. You do some research, and then what happened?
Well, some of my cardiologist actually I had no symptoms. And one of the last meeting I had with my cardiologist after he told me the results of the echocardiogram, he kept asking, do you have symptoms? And my response was no. So I had to make a decision and do the research on my own. And your website was a huge help with this. As to, whether I wanted to go ahead with surgery or wait for symptoms. And I remember when I was diagnosed with the mitral valve prolapse back in the early 2000s, my general physician had he also had mitral valve prolapse. And I remember him saying, it's important that you catch it and have it repaired, not replaced. And my local cardiologist in the local heart group here in Southern Indiana, the research that I did not see that they did any repairs. It was replacing the mitral valve. So that was my main focus, was finding someone who I was comfortable with that could repair it. And one of the videos on your website talks about the importance of repairing and not replacing. So that was where my focus was.
Dr. Gerdisch, let's unpack some of Janet's story here. Mitral regurgitation with no symptoms. Is that common, and can that be a problem for both the patient and the physician cardiologist who's watching that patient?
So really interesting points. And Janet tells the story perfectly. So there's very little for me to add other than to embellish on a couple of the points that she already made, which are, first of all, that first she just had mitral valve prolapse without much regurgitation. And only about 5% of those people go on to have severe mitral regurgitation. But then she had more regurgitation. And when you get to the moderate range, about half of those people will go on to severe mitral regurgitation. So she just took us on kind of the organic journey of what happens with the valve. Then with respect to symptoms, in my mind, it's always, what are we going to classify as symptoms? So yes, of course, symptoms that you experience in your daily activities, if you become short of breath, you have palpitations, that kind of thing. But also for me, any additional changes on the echocardiogram, in my mind, those are symptoms. That's a picture of your heart. If I see anything change about the movement of the heart, the strain of the ventricle, dimensions of the atria, the other valves perhaps showing some signs, for example, leaking in the tricuspid valve, which we need to address. Those are, for me, those are symptoms, even because Janet, being exceptionally healthy, is unlikely to complain about something because she has reserve, she has physiologic reserve. So she's the perfect story of somebody that you need to really stay on top of.
Janet, mitral valve repair was obviously very important. You did a lot of research to find someone who specializes in that technique. Why, if you can remember, was it so important for you to get a mitral valve repair?
My general physician, when I was first diagnosed in the early 2000s, had the same condition. So he shared with me, the importance of catching it. And that was actually my biggest fear when I went to see Dr. Gerdisch and have the consult with him, that it was even though I wasn't having symptoms, that I might have waited too long and wouldn't be able to get it repaired. So it was really important for me to find a surgeon whose focus was on repairing and not replacing, because replacing the valve was the only thing my local cardiologist had recommended. And, my research showed that I would need to go outside the metro area where I live in order to find a good surgeon to do that.
So Dr. Gerdisch, mitral valve repair, very big topic in our community. Can you maybe share for the folks out there who are newly diagnosed, what are some of the really big benefits of a mitral valve repair compared to a replacement?
So I'm going to front end load it a little bit because we just talked about the importance of meeting that challenge early. In other words, when you identify severe mitral regurgitation, that it be addressed at that stage before there are permanent changes in the heart. And the reason that's important is because we know that when we intervene with severe mitral regurgitation before there are structural changes in the heart, then we can restore a person's normal life curve. So somebody like Janet, for whom we intervene at a very good time when the heart muscle is still normal, we did, as I recall, Janet, we also fixed your tricuspid valve, didn't we?
We did, yes.
Yeah. So timing was ideal. We treated that as well, which can be a chronic and enduring problem, which we can even cover later. It will never be a problem for her. So, but doing so, we're able to put people really, Janet's survival is no different than a neighbor who doesn't have these valve issues. So when we have to replace a valve, although replacement valves are marvelous devices, they're brilliant, they do save lives, they extend lives. They don't give us the opportunity to restore the entirety, potentially, of a person's entire life because that prosthetic valve carries risk with it. And Adam, you've heard me say before, trading diseases. When we replace a valve, we trade diseases. We go from this really threatening disease to a much less threatening, but still a disorder. So in mitral valve repair, if we have somebody who has repairable anatomy and we can't repair it, it's a pretty big defeat, quite honestly. I mean, it's something I always prepare everybody for that very, very small possibility that we won't be able to repair the valve. But those of us who do it a lot won't give an inch on that. We are going to fix the valve any opportunity we have because of that difference, that distinguishing characteristic over the longevity of the patient, the entirety of their lives.
Thanks for the explanation, Dr. Gerdisch. So mitral valve repair is big on your radar, Janet. How did you go about finding Dr. Gerdisch?
First thing I tried to do was find out if the local heart surgeons would be able to do that. And I could not find anything online about local surgeons. So Indianapolis, Nashville, some of the closer, large metropolitan areas where I started to look. And when I Googled heart valve, mitral valve repair, Indianapolis, Indiana, your website came up, and the very first video I found was the one that talks about minimally invasive surgery, which was not really on my list of things, but I would have preferred that the valve be repaired no matter what, and I was okay with the sternotomy. not the minimally invasive, but that was just sort of icing on the cake, if you will, made the recovery a whole lot easier.
Janet, it's great to hear that the website helped you find Dr. Gerdisch. And I'm curious to know, you make that call to his office. What was it like when you spoke to his team?
You know, I took one of my sisters as a nurse, and I took her along as my, just to get the feedback that she would have from that perspective. And she and I kept saying it was like, we knew it was not your first rodeo. It was, we talked with the individuals there in the office. They got the medical background. And then we talked to Dr. Gerdisch, and I was totally comfortable. It's amazing to me I could make that big a decision in just having maybe a 20-minute conversation with him. But I had my questions, and I got confirmation on all the important points that I wanted to make sure of, which was repairing the valve, not replacing it if we could at all. And all the other questions answered, and his team took it from there. I mean, I was there April 28th and surgery scheduled June 17th. And a couple weeks after that, I was back to normal.
So Dr. Gerdisch, Janet was set. She wanted a mitral valve repair. She couldn't find it locally. She decided to come a couple hours from her home up to you in Indianapolis. I'm just curious to know, do other patients struggle finding someone who specializes in mitral valve repair?
There are centers that do this kind of work on a regular basis, and particular physicians that do these types of operations on a regular basis. And that's where you want to be so that you do get a valve repair. I would echo Janet's comment that the most important thing to her was having her valve repaired, right? So obviously, we love the minimally invasive approach, and we love to do that. And the vast majority of valve surgery we do through a small incision because it's nice for the patient, and we can deliver exactly the same operation. There are situations where that might not be so true. So, for example, I just presented a patient last weekend at a meeting we had in Boston that I had operated on just prior to that meeting because we needed a video for the meeting. And it's important for this context because that fellow was in his 70s, had severe mitral regurgitation, atrial fibrillation. So far, he's minimally invasive. We can fix those things minimally invasive. But he had calcium in the mitral valve. If there's any chance that the approach will affect my ability to repair the valve, then I do the approach that leads to the highest likelihood of repair. In this case, for him, it was a sternotomy so that I could decalcify the valve and still repair the valve. It's a little bit more complex to do that through a small incision, so we just don't do it that way. As Adam knows, in our practice, though, everybody that we do a sternotomy for has a special process called rigid sternal fixation, which it's very hard for us to tell our minimally invasive patients from our sternotomy patients because of it. So everybody has an accelerated recovery. Everybody has minimal discomfort. Everybody gets back to work quickly. But we always want to kind of tailor the situation for the patient. If the opportunity is there to be minimally invasive, then we do it. If that is our best approach, that's what we do. We change the approach based on the anatomy.
Dr. Gerdisch, Janet was set on a mitral valve repair. She came up, saw you. I'm curious to know, what did you two come up with in terms of the treatment of her mitral valve?
So I think that's a very important point that the two of us came up with a treatment plan. We discussed all the options. We tailored what her experience would be. We talked about what her lifestyle, her expectations, how she sees her life in the future. And you said she was set on a mitral valve repair. So that was our first conversation, right? Was, can we repair the valve? And I was certain we could repair the valve. We also saw that she had some leak in the tricuspid valve and that the annulus of the tricuspid valve was enlarged. And when we see that, we should always take the opportunity to judge whether the patient will benefit in the long run from having that addressed. In a case like Janet's, where it was leaking, where it was enlarged, she's a young, healthy person, we should definitely address that valve. It's important, of course, that we do that in a fashion that doesn't result in any untoward effects, but this is an operation we do over and over and over again, so we feel comfortable with it. So for Janet, after we talked about that, after I brought that into the conversation as well, recognizing that both valves could be repaired, that was our initial goal, was to get the valves fixed. Then looking at the operation from an anatomical standpoint, with respect to approach, with respect to safety, it was clear that Janet would be an excellent candidate for a minimally invasive double valve repair. And so that gave us the advantage not only of repairing the valves, but lessening the tissue trauma, probably abbreviating the recovery a little bit, and ensuring that the overall trauma to her and her life was diminished. So smaller incisions are nice in the sense that it also gives you kind of a nice cosmetic result that then leaves you with less kind of evidence of the operation, right?
Janet, as you may have seen in some of these videos with Dr. Gerdisch, one of the things he's known for is his rapid recovery protocol. And I've got to ask you, what was your experience recovering from a mitral valve and tricuspid valve repair?
Much faster than I'd anticipated. I'm active anyway, and I was continued with my daily walks with my puppy, and chicken coop cleaning and all of those things. I was back to doing all of that within a couple of weeks.
Janet, one of the big concerns patients have is pain. In addition to that, we're in this opioid crisis. I'm curious, what was your experience with pain, and did you need pain medication during your recovery?
When I left the hospital, I don't think I was on anything. They filled all the prescriptions for me at Franciscan Health, and I took this big bag of pharmaceuticals home, and I think I took Tylenol a few times, and that was really all I needed. I didn't need the nerve medication or any of that, so I forget what the name of the cryo technique is that Dr. Gerdisch uses, but that definitely worked. I've had other surgeries where I was on pain medication, so I know what that feels like. And I was amazed at the recovery because Tylenol was all I really needed.
Janet, I've been lucky to get to know you here, and I've heard you say that heart surgery is like a speed bump on the highway of life. What do you mean by that?
Well, I sort of, on my daily walks with my puppy Sadie, I had a lot of things to think about both before and after the surgery, and I had no idea what to expect. I mean, you can prepare a person and you can do all the online research and find a great physician to do it, but you really don't know what it's like until you get through it. And on the other side, I'm thinking, that really wasn't so bad. It was kind of like you said, kind of like a speed bump in the highway of life, and it could have been a whole lot worse. I'm just so thankful that I found Dr. Gerdisch and all of the individuals in his office at Franciscan Health. They were all great. It could not have gone better for me. And I just retired, so it was good sort of way to start retirement.
Dr. Gerdisch, you see thousands of patients there at Franciscan Health in Indianapolis. I'm really curious. You just heard Janet tell her perspective of this wonderful experience under your care. How do you feel about Janet's outcome?
Janet is emblematic of the vast majority of patients who have an experience with us, which is wonderful. It's just wonderful. It's so thrilling every day to be surrounded by the team that we have that's helping create this experience for the patients. I always say my job's the easy part because I get to do the work in the operating room. For me, it's fun and enjoyable, intense, exciting, exhilarating. And then I have all these wonderful staff that implement all of the things that lead to this type of recovery, that give people this very positive experience.
Dr. Gerdisch, thanks for those insights about Janet's recovery from your perspective. Janet, I've got to ask you, how are you feeling now?
I'm feeling fabulous. I have a long life to look forward to, and I am just very thankful that I found Dr. Gerdisch and his team, and we got it taken care of. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and you got it taken care of for sure, thanks to Dr. Gerdisch and his team. And now we've got to ask you the big question for all the patients out there who are watching this, which is, what is your advice for patients who may have just heard that they need heart valve surgery?
My advice would be research as much as you can. You have to be comfortable with the surgeon that you choose, and research it as much as you can. Meet with them, meet with multiple surgeons if you need to, and make the decision that's right to you. I know for me, it was 20 years of monitoring this situation. And I know several of the videos that I watched say that it's not necessarily an emergency. You don't need to make that decision today. So it's important to talk to as many surgeons as you need to find the one that you are most comfortable with.
Janet, before we end this wonderful chat, this is a pretty special experience in which I get to see a patient with their surgeon talking about a successful operation. I'm curious to know, is there anything that you want to share with Dr. Gerdisch about his care and the care of his team?
I just want a big thank you to Dr. Gerdisch and his team. I know they all work in concert together. It made my experience just a speed bump in the highway of life, as we talked about. But he's so very humble is my take on it. The first day that I talked with him after the surgery and he explained to me what was done, I was just so thankful that we were able to repair it. And his response to me, I believe, and pretty much the same words were, he said it was my privilege. He said the valve tissue is in great shape and the heart muscle is strong. And that to me was the best news ever. So I thank Dr. Gerdisch very much.
And on that wonderful note, we are going to wrap up the incredible story of Janet's successful journey to a healthy heart. Janet, thank you so much for being with us today and sharing all about your experience with mitral valve and tricuspid valve repair surgery.
Thank you very much, Adam.
And Dr. Gerdisch, as always, thanks for taking time away from your very, very busy practice there in Indianapolis, Indiana at Franciscan Health.
Thank you, Adam. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, Janet, for taking the time to tell your story and share your experience about your time spent with us.
Hi, everybody. It's Adam. I hope you enjoyed that video. And don't forget, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel, watch the next 2 educational videos coming up on your screen, or click the blue button to visit HeartValveSurgery.com.